I finished with the aspect of monitoring and evaluation. This is very crucial in having effective adaptation. Monitoring can be also an observation, obviously, and we want to address that aspect in this presentation. So I first will address the key concepts of monitoring and evaluation, the components of it, the institutional arrangement, indicators for monitoring, evaluation, monitoring and evaluation cycle. So we will have a little glimpse on the theory, and then we have a closer look to the national monitoring and evaluation system in Trinidad and Tobago. So monitoring and evaluation encompasses an identifying and evaluating the effects of adaptation, measures and various aspects related to climate change, including impact, risk, and vulnerability and resilience. So it is a very important aspect of monitoring, especially in the self-adaptation, what happened and was it effective. So it has two aspects. One is the monitoring, that is a systematic and continuous collection of information that can be qualitative in models, but it can be quantitative as well in observations, often based on a specific set of indicators. And we want to have the evaluation, that is a systematic, transparent and objective assessment of the effectiveness of an adaptation. And this is very little done, especially when it's self-made adaptation. Also here, it is important that, and the University of West Indies plays a role in it, that we collect data and we see the effectiveness. It is important to see that there are differences in it. So monitoring is a continuous process. It is accompanied with progress reports, and the focus on input and outputs. Evaluation, however, that is a sort of milestone, a sort of momentous of a status quo, and it is an in-depth analysis of the status quo of the achievement. So it focuses more on the outcomes, and that these outcomes can be also non-intended effects, right? So even if we put in something, but we see it has a non-intended effect, it is not an effective adaptation. Let's have a look to the components of monitoring and evaluation. So one component is the institutional arrangements. So these are the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders. The communities have a very important aspect here. It is the legal frameworks that these are adapted and allow this monitoring and evaluation. It is the information flow. Very important that we have that data sharing, but not only the data sharing, we must also have the capacity to understand and to understand the data and to act according to the data. So information and collection and sharing platforms, as well as capacity training, are important tools and system mechanisms of the monitoring and evaluation. Pillars of monitoring and evaluation is the enhanced learning. So we want either an change of attitudes, a change of measures, a change of approaches. So the learning aspect is important in this. The data and the monitoring should support the decision making from the communities up to government, and also horizontal in the different policy sectors and private sectors, obviously. It should lead to accountability, so it should create transparency, so who is responsible, who can be made responsible for loss and damages, for instance. And then we want an organizational improvement. We want that the monitoring and evaluation leads to more effective addressing of risks. So we also want have organizational changes. Let's have a look to the institutional arrangements. So what do the organizations, which is the role of the organizations? What we want to have in monitoring and evaluation as well as a structured approach to institutional arrangements. So it is important to assess the institutional readiness. Does the organizations have the capacity to do this monitoring and evaluation? Does not make sense to implement, for instance, a law or a guideline and the institutions are not ready to do. And this includes also the communities. Are communities able to collect, for instance, data in order to use? Very important aspect. It's important to develop monitoring and evaluation policies and procedures, but also to develop leaderships, and important to ensure that stakeholders are on board. So buy-in and clarity in the function. It is important that the capacity building is very crucial here, and then the development of the monitoring and evaluation frameworks. So it makes no sense, for instance, to develop a framework and then expecting that institution will change or organize. They need also the capacity building in order to do so. And sometimes it's vice versa. They need first the capacity building in order to enable institutional frameworks. So institutional arrangements in the system are a centralized, coordinated system. So this is usually a supranational institution, the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. And we have, then the ministries are responsible for data compilation and monitoring the process. We have institutions and agencies who collect the data. The methodological organization is one aspect in here, but also stakeholders, and then the regulatory agencies which create framework and laws. Have a look how it looks like in Trinidad and Tobago. We have here the supranational, so both the national level, the UNFCCC secretary, and then on national level we have the Climate Change Ministerial Committee, the Multilateral Environmental Agreement Unit. Here we are now guests of the Environmental Management Authority, which does these performance checks and manage and supervises the sectoral and local actors, for very important, the Ministry of Agriculture, but also ministries which are related, like the Ministry of Planning and Development or the Ministry of Health, and which are involved in this as well. And then we shouldn't forget them, the stakeholders which provide the data. What we want, I mentioned it before, we want to have a structured monitoring and evaluation process. It's important also to make it comparable. So usually this process is guided by indicators. Indicators is a set of measures that enable the monitoring and performance and tracking of the process. So the tracking, the indicators are important for tracking adaptation policy progress, justifying adaptation fundings, for instance, communicating, but also what I said, comparing and contributing to the global transparency network and to global, because we shouldn't forget, it's a global phenomenon, it's not a local phenomenon. We're using qualitative data, which are non-numeral data. This can be observation, it can be audio files, it can be pictures, and we're using quantitative, which are usually numbers and statistical data. Important for the development of the indicators is that they follow the SMART concept, which means that they are specific enough to be for instance, comparable and measurable. So that brings us to the second one, the M for measurable. They must be appropriate in the scale in order to be implementable and operationalizable, that we can operationalize it. They must be relevant and time sensitive. The purposes of the indicators are, they are for in the context of adaptation, they are important for climate parameters, so that these indicators is, for instance, the annual change in temperature or the number of days. I always press the button. Oops. Yeah, so sorry. And then with regards to the progress towards adaptation, it's important for the adaptation action. So it's a public awareness campaign, for instance, water efficiency, but it can be also a public awareness campaign with regard to certain approaches. For instance, burning fields to make them ready for the next crop, and maybe relearning. And it's important for adaptation results. Let's have a look a little bit to the theoretical perspective behind. So the monitoring and evaluation is part of the entire adaptation, climate adaptation process. So we see that it's has a vital role in revise of strategies and learning, and this affects the assess of the vulnerabilities. So, and it also affects the implementation process, because if we learn that measures might not be effective as we intended to, we have to change the approach. So it helps to look towards the progress of adaptation. The cycle includes the planning procedures, the monitoring procedures, the collection of data, obviously, but also the storage of data, the estimation of indicators, and the analysis and documentation, very important. This documentation and of information is particularly important, that we have to make the data accessible for communities. That means sometimes we have to reformulate very high technical information and break it down so that community members can understand what they need to understand. That's very, very important. So sometimes we have to change also the language or the way how we present data. And then the evaluation procedure and the reporting process. So this feeds also to the reporting procedure. With regards to the national monitoring and evaluation system, I just showed you the hierarchy. The national transparency system functions as a centralized repository for information. So it enables an environment it is important in enabling environment institutionally, legislation, and then a policy environment which allows this measurement system, which allows the data collection and the reporting system, and very crucial, the human capacity. And the national transparency system contributes to informing the national and international stakeholders, obviously, identifying strategic focus area, enhancing transparency, very crucial, but also setting progressive goals and adaptation goals, and that is country specific. So our goals can be different from the goals in Barbados, for instance. Ensuring credibility and demonstrating actions and approaches. Given that the reporting system is binaural and in a binaural cycle, in a binaural period, So every 2 years this must be reported. The monitoring and evaluation system is also in a 2-year period. So institutional arrangement means including the coordination, the entity and regional and sectoral leads. It includes the data collection and monitoring procedures, evaluation of the procedures, and reporting procedures. Also, the reporting procedures must be effective as well. So this is also part of the monitoring process. So if we have a closer look to this, so this in a more nutshell and detail, we see the enabling environment is the legislation. So we want that the environment creates a legal framework that defines the roles and responsibilities. Is very important for the accountability. Who is responsible? Who can be made accountable for certain measures? It is important for strategic direction guiding the national policy, and it is important for the institutional framework, so creating the organizational structure. Sometimes we have to create new authorities or new roles in authorities, as you can see here in this picture. Sometimes we have to create new roles, as we did for the Environment Management Authority. And the core components, the human capacity, as I said, it is very important to enhance the skills, the expertise, and the knowledge at all levels. It is important the data collection and management, the data collection storing. One problem we, for instance, face is that one authority or one ministry collects data but does not allow others to use. It is the same problem when we have private companies involved collecting data, and you might have to buy data sets. That is a huge problem for small development island states, because it compromises our financial resources if we rely on private sectors and then we have to buy data sets. On the other hand, we also do not have probably the capacities to collect all the data. So data is a huge aspect in Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore it's very important to develop the systematic data collection and reporting system and measurement systems, methodologies, and indicators. To track the progress of the National Adaptation Plan, the development of the indicators was done, and the Gauss consultancy was involved in this development. You had been involved in this development in order to make sure, to assure that the indicators are context sensitive but still general enough to compare towards other regions and towards other nations. So it's consultation with a stakeholder, you were part of it. A condensed list of progress indicators was created. And we're seeing for these key sector, agriculture, water, resources, health, and then especially for Tobago, which will be, the Tobago visit will be in, I think, 2 weeks, no, in 1 week time. And we see for agriculture, for those who have not been in that process and might not familiar with the indicators, we have the measure of estimated cultivated area. That's one indicator. The accessibility to information and data, how made climate sensitive parameters transparent and relevant to agriculture. The proportion of farmers trained on agricultural practice. So it is very important to work with the community in order to have climate change adaptation approaches which are climate change friendly, and to share the share of agriculture support policies and management plans for addressing climate change. And you had been involved in developing these indicators. So this feeds then in the national progress report, and this will feed, for instance, to the SDGs and in order to development and in order to develop frameworks and report on the progress. And for now, I just would close this session. I also see some of your audience had enough information. I hope you will still have time to raise your questions and then rush maybe for a coffee, and after you can restart fresh.